and welcome to this podcast with Albert Hammond, one of the most famous songwriters of the 20th century. Now, Albert, in this podcast over 6 parts, will be talking about working with some of the most famous people in the world. But for part 1, we're going to talk about his early life and his first steps into playing music. Albert Hammond, welcome. First of all, I want to say, it's a massive privilege to meet you because you're someone who has performed and also written for other people songs that have accompanied all our lives. You've written for Aretha Franklin, Celine Dion, Whitney Houston, Julio Iglesias and Willie Nelson, Tina Turner, Glenn Campbell, the Hollies, Starship. If I went on with this list, I think I'd take up the whole bloody hour. So I think I'll stop there while the going's good. But really, it is an immense privilege to interview someone who has written a soundtrack of our lives. So first of all, I want to thank you for that. And I want to take you back because I know you were born in London and you went back to Gibraltar very, very young with your family. And this going back to Gibraltar was then just post-war. And I just wondered what your first memories were of the difficulties of growing up as a child in a post-war Gibraltar.
Yes, well, I was born in London because the women and children were evacuated. My father stayed in Gibraltar because he, the men stayed there to, I suppose to defend it, with the British. And I was only 3 months old or 4 months old when the women and children were brought back in 1944. And my growing up in Gibraltar, actually, I have great memories. I was looking at my granddaughter. She's 3 years old, my son's daughter, and the other day, and I said to myself, "Wow! If one could stay like this, because everything seems beautiful, and there doesn't seem to be any danger. There's no fear. There's no anything, and so that my upbringing in Gibraltar was very similar. I didn't realize that there was a border until I got older. I didn't realize so many things. So I would say that I was a very privileged person, not in the sense that my parents had money, because they didn't, and my father was a fireman, and so we would sometimes get the rich people's toys that the firemen picked up. And I remember having a cowboy hat and a gun, but you couldn't put the thing to make it make a noise, so you just went with your mouth.
What creativity were you brought up around? Were your parents, you said that your father was a fireman. Were your parents in any way, were they listeners of music? Did they love music? Did they play music?
Yeah, I think music was with the people there because, we didn't have what we have today, and we couldn't afford records and things like that. So you put on the radio, and the great thing about Gibraltar was the radio played English, Spanish, Moroccan. So the English, you got everything from R&B to pop to rock to jazz to just everything. And in the Spanish, you got everything also, from zarzuelas to coplas to flamenco, and then the Moroccan music, which was also heard there. So my influence with music as a young, really young, I was 4 months old when I got there, so I was listening to all this kind of music since then. It was incredible, Then I joined the choir because I had what they said was a nice voice, So I joined the choir and I worked hard and I became head choir boy. And so they allowed me to sing solos. Um, and so on a Sunday, I would sing a solo in the middle of a song. I would be left alone to sing with the organ and the organ master. And I remember my parents after the service was over, the congregation would gather outside um, the church in Gibraltar, the Church of the Holy Trinity. It was, I get Church of England. And people would come up and say, "Oh, I love the way your son sang today," and I saw these smiles on my parents' faces, and I thought, that'd be a nice thing to do. I can make people happy.
Was
And so,
music as an escape for you, though? Was it some form of if I think of music in more in my teenage years than being much younger, but with all the teenage problems that everyone faces, music sort of provided another world where I could, in a sense, live in another world away from my parents. So I just wondered when that came up for you.
well, that came up later. When I realized that I liked singing, and I realized that I made people smile. Um, then I got more into it, and then I heard of a guy called Buddy Holly, and I think everybody has been influenced, at least in my time, and I think in the 20th century, because he had such a short career, and yet he wrote such incredible things, and most of them basically three chords. So I made a deal with my father's barber that if I came and sweep the hairs off the floor, that he was a flamenco player, that he would teach me three chords so I could sing Buddy Holly songs. so, so I mean, it was just. I really, when I say I was privileged, I was, because living in Gibraltar in those days was very safe. The only time it wasn't safe was when the sailors came in, or the forces, the army, the navy, the air force, and they would get drunk and they would destroy the place. So that was always scary, but otherwise it was really great, even though we had Franco on the other side. You know, um, for me, it didn't. It was just a natural, a normal, just a safe place to live and be happy and grow up and make friends. And your parents were strict with you. They wanted you, to have an education, if not in school, which obviously they did too, but at home. And I was very mischievous, so I got into trouble a few times.
So you said that, your parents, like all parents, they want you to have an education. They also want you to have what they see as a stable life. And creativity is often not seen as stability. And I just wondered when you started, because I know that you were in a band and you performed in Spain in your teenage years. So
Yeah.
maybe take me through that and how your parents were reacting at that time to you moving into this area.
My father comes from a family of 6 children. My mother comes from a family of 3, and my mother and father were always in favor of what of my creativity. My mother, because she had an experience when she was pregnant with me, that was a spiritual experience. So she felt something special about creativity. My father bought me my first guitar, which was a flamenco guitar. It wasn't even a steel string guitar. But you can imagine anything when you're creative. You can imagine that you can play it like Johnny Cash, or so. And it costs I think it cost my dad like £3.50. Then I taught what I knew to a friend of mine, and we started to sing in at parties, and then I realized that as we went to parties and sang, that all these girls came around,
Now watch out for part 2, when Albert goes from Gibraltar to London and he starts to work with pop star royalty.